The first number never appears on the screen, $800 million. That is the estimate. Not confirmed, not denied, just avoided. Somewhere in the Caribbean Sea, small boats explode, more than 100 people are dead. Off the coast of Venezuela, U.S. forces gather, quietly, expensively. Congress asks a simple question: how much does this cost? The Pentagon answers with silence. I want you to pause here, because democracies don't usually fear receipts. When oversight is blocked, power stops explaining itself. And when power stops explaining itself, it starts drifting. This is not yet about ideology. It's about accountability. If this story matters to you, stay with me. Listen carefully, because the money is only the surface. Underneath it, something far more dangerous is taking shape. What we are looking at is not a single operation. It is a cluster of actions, spread across geography, blurred across budgets. On one side, boat strikes in the Caribbean. More than 100 people killed. On the other, a U.S. military buildup near Venezuela that began in August. And behind both, a separate effort, an operation aimed at arresting former Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Different missions, different justifications. But Congress is asking one unified question: what is the total cost? Democratic estimates place the Caribbean strikes near $800 million. The Maduro arrest operation around $500 million. Together approaching $1 billion. The Pentagon disputes nothing, confirms nothing. Instead, it argues something stranger, that these operations are not really costing anything at all. This is where the issue sharpens, because money is how democracies measure restraint. And when costs disappear, limits tend to disappear with them. To see why this matters, we need to look backward at how this situation was allowed to form in the first place. This did not emerge overnight. It grew inside a familiar gap, a space between authorization and execution. The United States often deploys force incrementally, one asset at a time, one mission layered onto another. A ship moves, aircraft reposition, troops are temporarily assigned offshore. Each step looks manageable, each cost looks absorbable, until no one can see the total anymore. In this case, the buildup near Venezuela began in August, quietly, without a single clean line item attached to it. Operations in the Caribbean followed their own logic, their own tempo. Oversight committees asked for numbers repeatedly. What they received was not data, but deflection. The Pentagon's position was simple. These forces were already deployed somewhere. They just happened to be here instead. This is the structural weakness. When military action is treated as fluid, accountability becomes optional. And once accountability is optional, power starts operating on momentum alone. That momentum is about to collide with something much larger. The first real rupture happens in Congress, not quietly, but publicly. Rep. Adam Smith, the ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, says the numbers don't add up, not because they are wrong, but because they are missing. He says the estimates reach $800 million for Caribbean boat strikes alone. More than 100 people killed, boats destroyed, assets deployed, and still no official accounting. Smith keeps pushing again and again. The answer does not change. The Pentagon dismisses the question, saying the operations are not really costing anything. Smith responds with something sharper than anger: logic. Troops cost money, equipment costs money, fuel, maintenance, risk. None of that disappears at sea. Then comes the accusation that raises the stakes. St. Jack Reed calls it a violation of law, a pattern of stonewalling, a breakdown of trust. This is the first crisis, because once Congress is denied information, the system itself is under strain. If this concerns you, stay with me, because the explanation offered next only deepens the danger. The Pentagon's explanation sounds technical, but its implications are profound. Their argument is this: the troops were already deployed somewhere, the ships already existed, the equipment was already paid for, So moving them off the coast of Venezuela or into the Caribbean does not really create new costs. On paper, this sounds efficient. In reality, it is how accountability dissolves. Because cost is not just a line item, it is a signal. It tells Congress when force is being used, how often, and at what scale. When that signal is muted, operations become easier to expand, easier to extend, harder to stop. This is the hidden mechanism. By treating military power as endlessly flexible, the system removes friction, and friction is what prevents democracies from drifting into permanent action. The Pentagon says it has briefed Congress more than 24 times. Democrats say the numbers still aren't there. Two institutions, same meetings, completely different realities. That disconnect doesn't stay contained. It spills outward into policy, into strategy, and eventually into people's lives. The second crisis doesn't start with a strike. It starts with a promise. President Donald Trump says U.S. forces will stay off Venezuela's coast to apply pressure, leverage, control. He frames it as restraint. But behind that restraint is ambition. Trump says he plans to take personal control of Venezuela's oil industry. He argues that Venezuela's oil will pay for U.S. military operations. This is where the narrative fractures. Because oil does not work on political timelines. Industry experts say it would take $60 billion in investment and several years of repairs just to make the oil system functional again. Executives meet Trump at the White House. They hesitate. The Exxon CEO calls Venezuela uninvestable. Trump responds with a threat. He says he is inclined to keep Exxon out of the country. Markets react instantly. Exxon's stock dips. This is not just policy improvisation. It is power colliding with reality. And when that happens, the costs don't disappear. They get transferred. That transfer is already beginning. And it doesn't start in Washington. It starts with you. You don't see this line item, but you feel it. Because when nearly $1 billion becomes unaccounted for, it doesn't vanish. It reappears elsewhere. In delayed oversight, in reduced trust, in a government that stops explaining itself to you. If you are a taxpayer, this is your money moving without consent. If you care about the rule of law, this is precedent being quietly rewritten. Congress asks for numbers. The answer is deflection. That changes the balance. Because when elected representatives lose visibility, you lose representation. This isn't abstract. It means military power becomes easier to deploy and harder to question. It means decisions with life and death consequences move further away from public scrutiny. And once that distance grows, it rarely shrinks on its own. If this unsettles you, it should. Because accountability is not dramatic. It's procedural, boring, essential. If you believe power should answer to the people, stay with me. Share this. Keep watching, because this story doesn't stop at America's borders. Its consequences ripple outward. What happens off the coast of Venezuela does not stay there, because power is never local. When the United States conducts military operations without clear accounting, other nations are watching closely. Allies notice the precedent. Adversaries notice the flexibility. Force without transparent cost signals something dangerous. That rules can be bent as long as the justification is strategic enough. In Latin America, this revives old suspicions about sovereignty, about intervention. In global markets, uncertainty spreads. If oil policy can be decided by threat and improvisation, investment pulls back. Capital hates ambiguity. And when investors hesitate, economic pressure intensifies, not on governments first, but on populations. This is the chain reaction. Military opacity leads to political mistrust, which leads to economic instability, all without a single formal declaration. That is how modern power works. Quiet, incremental, deniable, but the system is now approaching a fork. The next decisions, will determine whether this trajectory stabilizes or accelerates. There are three paths from here. Each one is plausible. None of them are clean. The first is stabilization. Congress forces disclosure. Costs are acknowledged. Oversight is restored. The operations continue, but within visible limits. This path slows momentum. It reintroduces friction. And friction in democracies is a form of safety. The second path is normalization. The numbers never fully arrive. The missions quietly expand. What began as an exception becomes routine. A billion here, another there. No single decision feels dramatic, but the system drifts. This is how permanent operations are born. The third path is escalation. Oil pressure intensifies, markets resist, military presence hardens, costs rise faster than explanations. At that point, accountability is no longer missing. It's irrelevant. History tells us something uncomfortable. Systems rarely choose the best path by default. They follow momentum until something forces a correction. The question is not which future is possible, it's which one is being silently chosen right now, because the final decision has not yet been announced, but its outline is already visible. This story is not about $800 million or $1 billion. Those are symptoms. The real issue is simpler and more dangerous. When the Pentagon stops answering Congress, the public stops knowing. When the public stops knowing, power stops listening. Adam Smith keeps asking for numbers. Jack Reed calls it lawlessness. The administration says everything is fine, that nothing is really being spent. At the same time, boats explode, people die, forces mass offshore, and oil is promised that may never materialize. This is how democracies erode. Not with coups, but with silence, with blurred budgets, with operations that exist without clear permission. If you believe accountability matters, don't look away. Share this, question it, demand clarity, because once a system learns, it doesn't have to explain itself. It never volunteers to do so again. And in the next chapter, we need to ask an even harder question. What happens when secrecy becomes the strategy itself?